Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport, and we are finally here, part 5 of this long series, looking at every Ferrari Formula 1 driver ever and rating them in order of how they performed whilst racing for Ferrari. And it's been a long series. We have looked at 62 drivers so far, and we have just the top 15 to look at today. So make sure you go back and watch the first 4 parts first, or this isn't going to make much sense. All the videos are in their own playlist, made for your convenience because I am a really nice guy. So make sure you remember to subscribe, and with that, sit back, relax, and let's begin.
Welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport.
Number 15, Rubens Barrichello. How can a clear Ferrari number 2 make it so high on this list? Well, Rubens may have been there to support Michael Schumacher, but he was also a very successful driver in his own right. In 6 years with Ferrari, he finished second in the championship twice, third twice, took 9 wins, 55 podiums, and was a great ambassador for the team. After 4 years with Jordan and 3 with Stewart, he was signed by Ferrari to replace Eddie Irvine in the year 2000. He finished second on his debut behind teammate Michael Schumacher in Australia and would take his first Ferrari win in Germany. Things got better in 2001 as Ferrari established their dominance. No wins but podiums at almost every round, with only 7 of 17 races without champagne. 4 more wins in 2002, a couple in 2003 and a couple more in 2004. But his final year in 2005 was a disappointment, only finishing 8th in the championship. He left Ferrari to join Honda in 2006 before another good season with Brawn and a few final years with Williams, before retiring in 2011 as the driver with the most races in Formula 1 at that time. He may have been the second driver, but he accomplished plenty in red. Number 14, Juan Manuel Fangio. 14th may seem low for one of the greatest drivers in Formula 1 history, especially as he was also the 1956 champion with Ferrari, but he did only have 1 season with the Scuderia. It was just a very successful one, taking 3 wins in the Ferrari Lancia D50, as well as a couple of second places. It was just enough to beat Sterling Moss in the Maserati, and he left Ferrari to win his final championship with Maserati in 1957. Fangio was a successful driver, but most of that success came with Alfa Romeo, Maserati and Mercedes, but his single season with Ferrari was a great one. Number 13, Jody Schechter. The only South African champion in Formula 1, in fact by far the best South African to race in Formula 1 ever, as well as the last Ferrari driver to be drivers' champion for 21 years, until Michael Schumacher took the crown in 2000. Schechter made a name for himself with Tyrrell, taking 4 wins between 1974 and 1976, before joining Walter Wolf Racing, where 3 wins for the small independent team led to an impressive second in the championship. He joined Ferrari in 1979 and took 3 wins along with a very consistent season, took the championship at his first attempt. But 1980 was an awful year, not just for Schechter but for Ferrari in general. Jody Schechter scored just 2 points all season with 1 points finish, and didn't even qualify for the Canadian Grand Prix, and with Ferrari finishing 10th in the Manufacturers' Championship behind the likes of Arrows and Fittipaldi Automotive, Jody Schechter retired from Formula 1 and watched as Ferrari struggled to win anything for the next 20 years. Number 12, Gerhard Berger. I think most people forget that Gerhard Berger had 2 spells with Ferrari, each lasting 3 years, sandwiching a spell with McLaren. In the middle of his 14-long-year career, after a rough start to Formula 1 with German tyre company ATS and Arrows, Gerhard Berger made a name for himself with Benetton, taking his first ever win in Mexico in 1985. He joined Ferrari the year after and was a consistent midfield runner for the team. A long run of retirements robbed him of a better season, as would be the case for most of his time with Ferrari. He'd get a second place in Portugal before taking 2 wins at Japan and Australia. Despite a whole heap of DNFs, he managed to finish the season 5th overall in the championship. 1988 was tough for anyone who wasn't racing a McLaren. The only race not won by McLaren drivers Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost was the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, won by Gerhard Berger, who was also the best of the rest all season, taking 4 other podiums and finishing the championship 3rd, although a long way off the McLaren duo. But he had out-qualified Mikel Alboreto at every race, and only finished behind him once at the French Grand Prix. Alboreto left Ferrari for 1989, and Berger was now joined by Nigel Mansell in a very fragile Ferrari. Berger didn't finish the first 11 races and was injured in a heavy crash at Imola, but saw him miss the Monaco Grand Prix. He finished second in Spain and Italy and won the Portuguese Grand Prix, ending his first spell at Ferrari after 3 productive years at McLaren as teammate to Senna. Gerhard Berger rejoined Ferrari in 1993. Ferrari were not competitive and Berger mostly run around in the midfield, but the team were much improved for 1994. Berger lost close friends Ayrton Senna and countryman Roland Ratzenberger, but on track he took several podiums and a win at Hockenheim in Germany, ending the year with a respectable third in the championship. His final year with Ferrari in 1995 saw a number of podiums but no wins, and he left the team once again at the end of the year. On the face of it, Berger's time at Ferrari wasn't great, but the amount of retirements from winning positions must have made it a frustrating time for Berger, and he was always pushing for Ferrari. A great driver with a great legacy, Gerhard Berger is a driver who should have more wins than he does, but did well nonetheless. Number 11, Gilles Villeneuve. The tragically short legacy of Gilles Villeneuve makes him a hard man to place, as he almost certainly would have been world champion someday if not for his fatal accident. He has almost become a mythical figure in Formula 1 and should be a fan favourite amongst any true motorsport fan, if for his duel with René Arnoux at Dijon in 1979 alone. Apart from a single race for McLaren in 1977, Villeneuve's brief Formula 1 career was spent entirely with Ferrari, replacing Niki Lauda for the last 2 races of 1977. His early career saw many crashes and mistakes, including one at Fuji where he killed a spectator and a track marshal. In 1978 it took 8 races to score his first points, with a 4th place in Belgium, and later in the season, proving his doubters wrong, there were calls for Ferrari to replace him, with a podium in Austria and a win in Canada, at the track that now bears his name. He is still the only Canadian to win in Canada, and he was much improved from 1979, taking 3 wins and even could have been champion, but he obeyed Ferrari and stayed behind Jody Schechter at the Italian Grand Prix and finished behind teammate Jody in the championship by just 4 points. His win at a very wet American Grand Prix was also noteworthy, as he ended a practice session 9 seconds ahead of anyone else, quite a distance in Formula 1. 1980 was a rough year for Ferrari. They didn't have a full ground effect car compared to rivals and struggled for points. Villeneuve scored just 6 but still beat Jody Schechter, who then retired. The first ever turbo car debuted in 1981, and by all accounts it was a terrible dog of a car with throttle lag and handling issues, but massively faster than anything else on the straights. Despite the car being rough to drive, Gilles Villeneuve took 2 wins at Monaco and Spain, where the top 5 finished within just over a second of each other. Ferrari had the fastest car in 1982 and all looked good for the team. After a 1-2 finish where Villeneuve fell out with teammate Didier Pironi at Imola, he was killed in a crash with Jochen Mass at Zolder. In a season where Didier Pironi would also not finish the season due to severe injuries, Ferrari would have had a driver's champion, either Villeneuve or Pironi. They still won the Constructors, but Gilles Villeneuve left a legacy with a track in Vancouver named after him, and a son who became world champion in 1997, although he never drove for Ferrari, probably because he's quite annoying. Number 10, Kimi Räikkönen. Kimi Räikkönen was very lucky to be champion for Ferrari. By all accounts, it should have been Fernando Alonso or Lewis Hamilton who should have won that championship, but infighting and bad luck cost them, and let the ever-consistent Ferrari of Kimi Räikkönen to sneak in and win the 2007 championship after being 3rd entering the final race. He did take 6 wins, including his first Ferrari race at Australia, so it wasn't just luck, he was there all season shattering the McLarens. After 2007, his heart didn't really seem in it anymore. It was left to Felipe Massa to challenge Hamilton in 2008. Räikkönen only took 2 wins at Malaysia and Spain, and he was still a consistent driver, taking several podiums and finishing 3rd in the championship. 2009 was a bad year for Ferrari, who did not take to the new regulations well. Kimi Räikkönen took the team's only win of the year at Spa in Belgium and finished the year 6th. He left Ferrari and Formula 1 to pursue rallying, but after realising that was a really bad idea, he returned to Formula 1 with Lotus in 2012, and after 2 good seasons he returned to Ferrari. In 2014, Ferrari were once again off the pace, with Kimi Räikkönen finishing the year 12th, with his best finishes being a 4th at Spa and a 6th at the Hungaroring, but Räikkönen would be joined by Sebastian Vettel and would spend the next 4 years backing his teammate up in a charge for the World Championship that would be futile against the dominant Mercedes team. Kimi Räikkönen was a consistent ever-present who got caught up in too many midfield incidents, but did a good job for the team. But he only took 1 win in his Ferrari comeback in America in 2018, and he left Ferrari again shortly after, and is now still racing at Alfa Romeo with the 2021 season set to be his 19th year in Formula 1. And Kimi Räikkönen is the most experienced Formula 1 racer ever. Number 9, Jackie Ickx. Jackie Ickx doesn't get enough praise for being a masterful legend of motor racing, one of the best drivers to never win the Formula 1 World Championship. Ickx had a long Formula 1 career that saw him join many teams, but it was his first full season in Formula 1 with Ferrari that brought him to prominence. Taking his first win in France and with a couple of podiums, he finished the year 4th. He joined Brabham in 1969 and finished 2nd in the championship before returning for Ferrari for 1970, and after a bad start took a 2nd in Germany and a win in Austria, and 2 more wins whilst chasing down deceased championship leader Jochen Rindt. He only just missed out, but later he said he was glad he did not take the championship as he did not want to beat a man who couldn't defend their championship lead. 1971 started well with a 2nd in Spain and 3rd in Monaco and a win in Zandvoort, but 6 retirements in the last 7 races and an 8th place in the only other race meant Jackie Ickx only finished 4th. 1972 was much the same, good results and a win in Germany surrounded by DNFs and another 4th in the championship. His final Ferrari year in 1973 was much worse, with only a few scattered points finishes, and Ickx left the team midway through the season because Ferrari had pulled out of Ickx's favourite German Grand Prix, where he finished 3rd in a McLaren. Ickx would finish his career with the Frank Williams team, Walter Wolf Racing, Team Ensign, and finally Ligier in 1979. But outside of Formula 1, Ickx has won Le Mans 6 times, the Bathurst 1000, the Can-Am Championship, European Formula 2, the World Endurance Championship, and the Paris-Dakar Rally. So there isn't much he hasn't won. Number 8, Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso's time at Ferrari was disappointing only because he never won the championship. The 2-time world champion joined Ferrari in 2010, replacing Kimi Räikkönen. He won on his Ferrari debut and took 4 more wins and only lost the championship by 4 points. He probably should have won but for a Ferrari blunder when they pitted to cover Mark Webber and ended up stuck behind Vitaly Petrov, allowing Sebastian Vettel to win the race and the title. 2011 was nowhere near as good despite 10 podiums and a win at the British Grand Prix, which he inherited when Red Bull threw their chances in a bin. 2012 was better. Wins in Malaysia, Valencia and Germany gave him a massive 40-point lead in the hunt for the title, but several incidents and mechanical issues meant he ended up behind Sebastian Vettel once again, and again once more in 2013, although further off this time, but 2 more wins seem to be pointing Ferrari in the right direction. Despite well beating Kimi Räikkönen by out-qualifying him 16 times, he only had a couple of podiums and ended his final Ferrari season 6th in the final standings. He left Ferrari for McLaren, dropped further down the grid, failed to win the Indy 500, but has won the 24 Hours of Le Mans race twice, and Alonso will return to Formula 1 with Alpine, but his Ferrari days are definitely over. Number 7, Sebastian Vettel. Replaced Fernando Alonso from 2015 onwards, Sebastian Vettel had just about as much luck as Fernando Alonso in winning a championship for Ferrari, but in his time the Scuderia could never get on terms with Mercedes. He won his 2nd race with Ferrari in 2015 and only finished outside the points at 2 races, along with 2 wins meant he was the best of the rest, some way behind the Mercedes pair, but well clear of everyone else. 2016 was a frustrating year, several podiums but no wins, and being T-boned by Daniel Kvyat at Russia didn't help his mood, along with a shouting match with race director Charlie Whiting, probably the signs the wheels were falling off. But Vettel bounced back in 2017. 5 wins and only 7 races off the podium meant he finished a lot closer to Lewis Hamilton than should have been possible, although not enough to lay a real challenge to him. But it meant eyes were on Vettel to break the Mercedes streak in 2018, and it started well. Leading the championship halfway through the season plus 5 more wins all looked good, until he binned it in the rain at the Hockenheimring, and Hamilton ended up dominating that championship too, with Vettel a long way behind in 2nd. After that, Ferrari went backwards and Vettel started spinning loads. New teammate Charles Leclerc got the better of Vettel in his debut season, and Vettel only took 1 win at Singapore, along with a couple of clashes with his teammate, meant a disappointing 4th in the championship. And 2020 was awful, with Ferrari having their engine reined in due to some fuel irregularities in 2019. The team struggled, Vettel spun a lot and had his worst Formula 1 season, finishing 13th. There is no doubt that we will look back at Sebastian Vettel as a god in Formula 1, and he was an asset to the Ferrari team. It'll be interesting to see how he gets on at Aston Martin in 2021. Number 6, Phil Hill. How can a guy who won 3 Grand Prix be ahead of people like Vettel, Alonso and Fangio? Well, Phil Hill is the quiet champion, and in his relatively short Formula 1 career, really excelled for Ferrari. He joined Ferrari for his 2nd ever race in Formula 1 in 1958, before taking 3rd place at the 2 final rounds in Monza and Morocco. He joined full-time in 1959, and Phil Hill would take 3 podiums on his way to 4th in the championship. 1960 was tougher with Ferrari further off the pace, but Phil Hill would take his first race win at Monza, and the first Grand Prix won by an American since Jimmy Murphy in 1921, although not including the Indy 500, which was part of the calendar for some reason. 1961 was spent trailing teammate Wolfgang von Trips, but Hill did record wins in Belgium and Italy himself, as well as podiums in 6 of the 8 races. But after the death of Wolfgang von Trips and Phil Hill already being champion, Ferrari pulled out of the last race of the year, which would have been Phil Hill's home Grand Prix. 1962 was the beginning of the end, with Ferrari not as dominant as the previous year. Phil Hill would take 3 podiums but slip to 6th and leave Ferrari before the year was out. He did also win 3 Le Mans for Ferrari and is a legend in their eyes, but Phil Hill deserves to be remembered as a great addition to Formula 1's history and deserving of top 6 on this list. Number 5, John Certis. Former motorcycle champion John Certis switched to Formula 1 in 1960 with Lotus, but joined Ferrari in 1963, winning in Germany but having many DNFs and only finishing 4th in the championship. In 1964, despite a fair few retirements, he managed 2 wins in Germany and Italy, as well as podiums in Britain, the Netherlands, America and Mexico, which took him to the title just ahead of Graham Hill. The following years were difficult ones, with only 3 podiums and an injury from a testing crash in a Lola T70 at Motorsport in Canada meant he missed the final 2 rounds of the Formula 1 season, and he himself was a half inch shorter on one side. He returned in 1966 and won in Belgium, but his relationship with Ferrari turned sour, as made famous by the events of Le Mans 1966. And with a strong challenge from Ford with the improved GT40 ready to beat Ferrari, there are conflicting stories of what happened even before the start. Ferrari could only afford to enter 2 cars instead of 3. I believe John Certis from this point on, as he said he was driving with Ludovico Scarfiotti, and Certis thought as the fastest Ferrari driver, he should take the first stint and go hell for leather to push the Fords, to chase him down, but was refused due to politics and Scarfiotti's uncle in attendance, and happening to be the CEO of Fiat, who owned Ferrari. Certis left because of this and the lack of support from Enzo Ferrari and joined Cooper in Formula 1 instead. Neither he or Ferrari won the title in 1966, and Ferrari didn't win Le Mans either. They probably should have listened to Mr. Certis. Number 4, Mike Hawthorn. Another driver from the early days of Formula 1, Mike Hawthorn got his first Formula 1 podium with a 3rd place at the British Grand Prix in a Leslie Hawthorn entered Cooper Bristol in 1952. He was picked up by Ferrari for 1953 and put in a decent season, taking his first win in France, and with a couple of other podiums took 4th in the championship. 3 second places and a win in Spain helped him climb to 3rd in 1954 with 24 and 9/14ths of a point. Some way off Fangio, but less than a point behind teammate Jose Froilan Gonzalez thanks to the stupid fraction system. In 1955, Hawthorn moved to Vanwell for a couple of races, but rejoined Ferrari in just 3 Grand Prix that year and didn't score any points, and after a year off returned to Ferrari in 1957. He'd scored a couple of podiums, but would only manage 4th in the championship. 1958 would prove to be his final year in Formula 1. He'd only take 1 win in France, but 5 second places in the last 7 races helped him lift the title by a single point ahead of Stirling Moss, who should have been champion. Not only had Moss won 4 races compared to Hawthorn's 1, but he had stopped Hawthorn getting a penalty in Portugal that subsequently led to him beating Moss in the championship. Mike Hawthorn would be killed near Guildford in 1959 on a piece of road I drive on nearly every day. There was rumours he had a terminal illness, but it was sad that the new champion died just a few months after his retirement from Formula 1. Number 3, Alberto Ascari. One of the first Ferrari drivers in Formula 1, he raced at the 1950 Monaco Grand Prix, finishing 2nd, as well as 2nd in Italy, helping him to 5th in the first ever championship. In 1951, he took his first wins in Germany and Italy, as well as 2 second places to finish 2nd in the championship, behind the Alfa Romeo of Juan Manuel Fangio. In 1952, he took the championship with ease. He skipped the Swiss Grand Prix and entered the Indy 500, but spun out and finished 31st, meaning after 2 rounds, Ascari had no points. He took the final 6 wins of the year and the title, and returned in 1953 with more wins and another title. He left Ferrari in 1954 after a pay dispute and joined Lancia, but the car was not ready, and he entered a couple of races with Maserati and a single race for Ferrari in Italy before debuting the Lancia at the final round. His final race was the 1955 Monaco Grand Prix, where he ended up in the harbour before being killed in a testing crash in a car he wasn't supposed to be driving. The world was robbed of one of the great early talents of Formula 1. Number 2, Niki Lauda. After 3 unsuccessful years with March and BRM, You'd be forgiven for thinking that Niki Lauda was just going to be another average Formula 1 back marker, but that changed in 1974 when he joined Ferrari alongside good friend Clay Regazzoni at the latter's suggestion. He took his first Formula 1 win in his 4th race for Ferrari at the Spanish Grand Prix, and took another at the Dutch Grand Prix, and was leading the championship after scoring a couple of points at the British Grand Prix. Unfortunately, 5 retirements in a row ended his championship chances, and he ended the year 4th in the overall standings. He was a big part of why the Ferrari was successful in 1975, as he was very committed to testing and improving the car. 3 wins in a row at Monaco, Zolder and Anderstorp, followed by 2nd in the Netherlands and another win in France, gave him a 22-point lead in the championship, and with another win in America eased him to the title. 1976 looked like it's going to be the same way, with 4 wins and 2 second places in the first 6 races, followed by another win in Britain before the famous crash at the Nürburgring left Lauda burnt and severely injured, and the events of Rush happened. Lauda came back far quicker than anyone was expecting and only missed a couple of races, but lost the championship to James Hunt after pulling out of Fuji in the wet. Something that after his crash that year, I do not blame him for. He returned stronger in 1977, only 3 wins but 6 second places meant another title, despite bad relations with Ferrari and new teammate Carlos Reutemann, and he left because the team were running a 3rd car for unknown Canadian Gilles Villeneuve in Canada. But he was still the champion and would take another title win in 1984 with Brabham. Niki Lauda is most famous for his accident at the Nürburgring, but he was a dominant racer and an intelligent one. Another driver whose name crops up in the greatest of all times list, but only the 2nd best Ferrari driver ever. Who could possibly be first? And number 1, Michael Schumacher. After looking at the other 76 drivers on this list, it may seem like a bit of a predictable end with Michael Schumacher taking the top spot, but you can't overlook what he did for Ferrari and how they've been weaker since he left. After winning 2 world championships for Benetton, Schumacher along with Ross Brawn moved over to Ferrari in 1996, but they were a step behind the Williams team, and Schumacher only took 3 wins on his way to 3rd overall. 5 wins followed in 1997, but it was all for naught as he once again lost out to Williams and was disqualified from the championship after steering into Jacques Villeneuve. Not the first time Schumacher was scrutinised for dirty tactics. In 1998, Ferrari had a new challenger in the form of McLaren as Williams slipped down the pack. Mika Häkkinen beat Schumacher to the title, despite Schumacher winning 6 races, and it looked like more of the same in 1999 until Schumacher had a horror crash at Silverstone, broke his leg and missed 6 races. He returned in 2000 and finally won his first championship. 9 wins, and what followed was one of the most dominant periods in motorsport as Michael Schumacher and Ferrari kept winning the championship until 2004. 9 more wins in 2001, 11 in 2002, 6 in 2003 and a massive 13 wins in 2004. In his final 2 Ferrari years, Schumacher would struggle against the new young midfield, with the likes of Fernando Alonso, Kimi Räikkönen and Juan Pablo Montoya all presented a new challenge. He'd only take 1 win in 2005 and his 7 final F1 wins in 2006. In 11 years with Ferrari, he never finished lower than 5th in the championship. In 1999, when he missed a chunk of the season, he won at least 1 race every year. Ferrari since have had just 1 Drivers' Championship in 17 years. It was a shame he returned with Mercedes in 2010, spending 3 years with the team before they became their own success juggernaut, but it only served to damage Schumacher's legacy. And now, after his skiing accident in 2013, we don't know how Schumacher is health-wise, as the family keep information very private. But hopefully somewhere he's watching his son make the grid with Haas for 2021. I will admit I've never thought of Michael Schumacher fondly. He's a bit of a cheat in my opinion, but there's no doubt he is the greatest Ferrari driver ever and one of the greatest of all time. So that is the end of this long saga, rating every Ferrari Formula 1 driver in order, from Ernesto Brambilla in 77th to Michael Schumacher as the ultimate number 1. Thank you for watching this long series, and thank you to everyone who has subscribed. It means a lot. If you haven't, now is a good time to do it. Leave a like, comment, share the video. Once again, a massive thank you, and have a good one.